Your body, my choice, forever. That's what this young right wing commentator guy posted just as Donald Trump won the US election. We control your body. It's your body, my choice. His post blew up.
Yeah, that's so gross. Was that familiar? You said you're tired of hearing the so much hate towards women and misogyny, and you wish it would stop. Yeah, I kind of agree too. It's getting real old and real annoying. Well, I have my own theory as to why that is, if you're interested in it. Okay, so like this is my hot take, but I was recently asked myself, how do classic literary portrayals of compliant and non-compliant women contribute to the normalization of misogyny in contemporary society? Yeah, no, kind of a mouthful, but I just think of weird things. Um, but yeah, so uh, the casual misogyny and hostility we see in the present day isn't some new phenomenon. Rather, it's just a continuation of some deeply rooted literary traditions that normalize punishing women. When a woman says no, the world typically still responds with suffer then or we don't care, which isn't okay. I've been thinking about it, and I think part of this is like tied to the myth of patriarchal necessity, is creating this idea that punishing non-compliant women preserves social order. I can actually give you a few examples of this from my readings in that world literature class that I've been taking this semester uh, to stress my point a little bit better. Okay. So we read about Medea, Shakuntala, and Sir Juana Inez de la Cruz. All three of them are examples of women who are disciplined, shunned, or silenced for stepping out of line from social expectations, uh, from stepping out of lines of social expectations of women in some way, shape, or form. When you think about it, it kind of creates this trans historical script of misogyny that gets played out so very, very often in so many different cultures that it's exhausting to think about. Um, each culture really kind of portrays female disobedience, not merely as uh, just disobedience, but an actual danger, something that society needs to neutralize or contain for its own stability. Uh, and that framing normalizes violence, whether that's physical, social, or spiritual violence. So let's start with Medea, for example. She's a title character of the play by Euripides that we read about. Going back as far back as ancient Greece, we can see some of the earliest instances of this control and portrayal of disobedient women as wicked. At one point, Medea states in the play, "I'd rather face the enemy 3 times over than bear a child once." Her point is clear. Patriarchal motherhood demands more pain, more suffering, more agony than any battlefield that a man walks onto. Later on, in response to her continued refusal to obey, and admittedly her infanticide, but also the disobedience, Jason refers to her as, "You hateful thing, you woman most utterly loathed by the gods, in me, and by all the race of mankind." He then goes on to wish death upon her and call her a monster. Um, and the story takes great pains to make her out to be a monster that needs to be destroyed or punished. But I think there is something that needs to be said about asking what would drive a mother that far that she would take such drastic action to the children that she gave birth to and loved. Not that I'm saying it's okay, but she didn't obey and then she just became a monster, at least as far as the story was portrayed her. But if we think about it, but if we want to look ahead at another example, we can jump almost 1,000 years into the future on a completely different continent, and we can see Shakuntala in the story, who is a good contrast from Medea. She fits the role of the meek compliant girl and then the meek compliant wife. Uh, Shakuntala's crime is absurd when you really think about it. She's daydreaming about the her husband, the guy that she just fell in love with, and thinking about what her life's going to be, and she forgets to go greet the sage Dervasis when he's at the door. It was slightly impolite, but that doesn't warrant the punishment that she received. In the passage, she says, "Since you blindly ignore a great sage like me, the lover you worship with mindless devotion will not remember you, even when awakened, like a drunkard who forgets a story he just composed." So this curse just wiped her entirely from Dushanta's mind. Um, and we see it's basically a punishment for a moment of inattention. Are you listening to me? Or are you going to sleep? Oh, okay. You're still awake. Just checking. Um, but yeah, for a slight distraction, she's punished way unnecessarily. But unlike Medea's defiance, Shakuntala just accepts her fate with resolve, and she never curses back. She never rebels. She just tolerates her being essentially tossed aside by the king when she approaches him and he doesn't remember her. She tries to present herself to her great husband, and she's just some pregnant woman who he has no idea who she is, and society just has no use for someone like that. But she stays loyal and obedient and thinks about him for years, even with his son that he doesn't acknowledge. And eventually, her long and silent obedience is touted as a virtue. Uh, Years and years later, after he's gone to war and done plenty of other things, the king finally meets his son and her, and he's amazed when he sees them after the curse is broken. In the text, he looks at Shakuntala and comments, wearing dusty gray garments, her face gaunt from penances, her bare braid hanging down, she bears with perfect virtue the trial of long separation, my cruelty forced upon her. Her obedience and acceptance is seen as a virtue, and the king is pleased at the devotion and purity she kept for him. So we see like her compliance is finally years later rewarded uh, by having her husband come back to her, her son get acknowledged, and her gain the status. But did she really deserve this punishment to begin with? No, not necessarily. At worst, she could be slightly rude. And when she presented herself to the king, at worst, she could just be someone who needs help. I mean, she's the daughter of the sage. He's not known to be a liar, even if he doesn't remember it. Maybe if magic exists in the world, questions should be asked. But either way, on one side, we have the angry patriarchal response to Medea being defiant, contrasted with the encouraging, favorable depiction of Shakuntala. Uh, and then lastly, we have Sor Juana Inez de la Cruz, who I guess kind of represents something like a third path. But keep in mind that her story as well takes place another 1,000 years later, in yet another culture on a different continent. So, like I said, this isn't uh, left into just one place. But with Sor Juana, you had a woman who had to take a vow of chastity and forsake all the trappings of life in order to pursue her interest in learning. She had to do that as just some kind of middle path to get what she wanted. And even when she adhered to the rules within the system of the church, she was still restricted and punished and still uh, had to try and navigate through those um, restrictions anyway. Um, in her famous letter, she stated, "At one time, my enemies persuaded a very saintly and guileless prelate who believed that study was a matter for the Inquisition to forbid me to study. I obeyed her for the 3 months or so that she had power over me in what concerned my reading. But as for the absolute ban on study, this was not in my power to obey. For although I did not study in books, I studied everything that God created, and all this universal machine served me as a textbook." So we see Sirwana, even though she did find kind of a middle path, she still suffered consequences for her role. And in a way, she was silenced because of her role of trying to learn and say something, um, even if it wasn't something too loud, and even if she didn't want to broadcast it just for her. But I like it at the end where Sirwana flips the script when she mentions how she thinks Aristotle would have written a great deal more had he spent more time cooking and in the kitchen. Uh, like they try to portray womanly duties and household duties as, or they try to portray household duties as something womanly and uh, not worth attention or for great thinkers. But look at what she accomplished just within her kitchen and doing ladling soup. So in the end, we have three continents, 3 centuries, three different cultures entirely, yet one clear pattern. Non-compliant women are not to be tolerated, while obedient women are to be celebrated. Even today, women who defy gender expectations are often face hostility and or social punishment. Uh, I like we just saw in that clip recently with the Fuentes dude saying "Your body, my choice forever." This misogynistic attitude reflect is reflected today, and but we've been seeing it over centuries throughout time. Um, an assumption of control over women's autonomy and agency, directly tied to how literature and culture have historically portrayed rebellious women as dangerous and wrong. So we have just we can thank all these stories from all around the world for creating this narrative about what's acceptable for women and what isn't, and it plays into how people think and view women today. So, what do you think of my theory? I'm gonna take that to mean that you like it. Okay.